Hey there everybody, this is AJ of the Mighty Glue Stick, and I'm coming at you with another monster video since they seem so popular. This time I'm going to cover a creature which I don't think I've ever talked about before, and doesn't get a lot of exposure in D&D games that I've seen online. However, it's a very interesting creature, and I'll tell you why. And this is the Azer, which is the dwarf-like elemental beings of fire and earth that are found on the elemental planes. So they dwell in a territory between the elemental plane of fire and the elemental plane of earth, where there's a massive mountain range where they basically spend their entire time devoted to building fabulous works of art and artifice out of precious metals and gems, which they hunt around the huge mountain range endlessly. And they will travel across the plains to find particularly amazing gems. So if you have some sort of involvement with amazing gems or precious metals, which adventurers generally do, you may encounter some Azer which are found outside of their plane of existence. So, what is an Azer? An Azer is a very interesting creature from a DM's point of view, and also a sort of philosophical point of view, because they are a living being of elemental forces, and yet in many ways they're like a construct. They are not born, they're built of the life force of other Azer. So in physical form they are a metallic skinned being of fire, so they look like a dwarf, but their flaming hair and beards and their beaming eyes and the massive amounts of heat that they radiate give away their nature as actually being a being of fire which is contained in a metallic looking skin. They are created when other Azer combine their life forces and create another Azer and build the skin around it. So in that way their population remains in check, but on the other hand, if they found some way to speed up this process, they can rapidly replicate themselves a millionfold. So they don't have an origin story in the monster manual, so I leave that up to anybody else who's watching this. But I like to think that they were created through the artifice of some sort of dwarven god or something, who maybe had a servant race that he created, and they just basically, one or two of them got free and learned how to replicate themselves, and the result is the race of the Azer. So they are the enemies, or the natural enemies, of the Efreet, because the Efreet betrayed them. Originally they were allies, and the Azer helped the Efreet build the City of Brass, the fabled City of Brass, on the elemental plane of fire. And it is the Azer who know all of the secrets of the City of Brass, how to get in undetected, how to get out, where all the portals are, how to open all the vaults and things. This fabulously wealthy city. And because of this, the Efreet saw fit to betray them and try to enslave them, or if not that, exterminate them. But because they have the knowledge of the City of Brass, there is an uneasy truce between them, and all-out war has never broken out, which might go particularly badly for the Azer, considering that they don't really have any allies, whereas the Efreet have something on everybody that they deal with, and massive egos to boot. So yeah, the Azer of course have immunity to fire and heat. They're also immune to poison. They don't need to eat, sleep, breathe, eat. Did I mention eat? They don't need to eat. They don't need to do anything other than exist and work and patrol around their mountain ranges looking for trouble. Now, because they create themselves of themselves, I like to think that the Azer are engaged in an endless conversation with themselves. When they're walking around speaking in Ignan, you can imagine coming across a posse of these things walking around in like a foursome, and they're basically bickering amongst themselves as if they're talking to themselves. Because their personalities would all be quite similar, if you imagine that, and they would have all these quirks like a very close-knit family. And that also explains why they're dead set on their task of building the most fabulous items out of precious metals and gems, because they all share exactly the same focus. So they're not like, they're not right. They're not they're not ordinary people, that's for sure. And their personalities would be very homogenous and very, very against anybody who dissents with the commonly held views on things. So I don't think that you would encounter an Azer who is out to help you against his own kind, unless it's an extraordinary circumstance. I think a case where you've used magic to control an Azer's mind would be very interesting, because an Azer would never expect another member of their kind to do anything out of the ordinary that they wouldn't have thought of first. So in that regard, an Azer who is mind controlled might be extremely obvious to other Azer that something's up, and they would detect it straight away. Of course, in their mountain fortress home, they are immune to fire and heat, so magma traps, flame traps, smoke, fire, they don't need to breathe or eat, so putting you through areas, tunnels that are swamped with toxic gas, for instance, since they're immune to poisons. Yeah, no problem. No problem at all. So entering into the Azer's realm would be like entering the worst environmental disaster you've ever seen. It would be backdraft combined with toxic fumes and all sorts of nastiness, molten piles of slag and radioactive materials and all sorts of nastiness. So yeah, outside of that, I don't know really how other ways you would use Azer apart from they are perfect prime stock for stocking dungeons and things, since they don't have that, they've got that self-sufficiency, and they would really make the perfect slave race, because if you know how to manipulate one of them, you know how to manipulate all of them. And of course the Azer hate that about themselves, I'd imagine, and would avoid slavery at all costs, and also would seek to free themselves at all costs if they were ever in captivity, because that whole aspect of them being able to be replicated, and that whole idea of having yourself replicated by somebody else, yeah, I'd imagine that would really bug the ignorance. The Azer. So yeah, they're living fire, masters of metal and crafting. They can teach dwarves how to build amazing objects, and they are the enemies of the Efreet. Allies, probably other creatures that are of elemental nature and love gems and jewellery. They probably have a nice conversation with a bunch of gnomes. They really probably hate Zorn a great deal, since they eat precious metals and gems, and would hunt, I'd imagine, go hunting them down and killing them as best they can. And Zorn and an Azer would fight to the death as soon as they saw each other. So yeah, interesting race, and if you're doing any plane hopping, I would certainly recommend an encounter with the Azer, because they'd be great to roleplay as a DM.